Well, I am Sister Bischoff, and this is Elder Bischoff, and we're from Indianapolis. We have been out on a mission for about a year. We have a little over, I guess we only have 5 months left. But can you tell us where you're from? Oh, is that right? Wow. Is there still anything left of Texas after all the storms? Good.
Good for you.
That's good. Well, what we'll do is we're outside and we're going to pan the area while Elder Bischoff gives us an introduction to how the Johnsons got here. And then we'll go into the house. And if you have any questions at all, please break in and ask us. Actually, the questions make the tour so much better. And it kind of adds something. And, you know, there's so few of us that it's not going to be a problem. So let me switch the camera. There we go.
Well, welcome to Hiram, Ohio. When you read some of the sections in the Doctrine and Covenants that says Joseph Smith received such and such a revelation in Hiram, Ohio, this is the place. This is the Johnson farm. And Hiram is a very rural community. So what you see is a lot of farmland as far as the eye can see. Well, John Johnson was born in 1778. I refer it to the Declaration of Independence. That helps me remember. But he was born 2 years after the Declaration of Independence. He married his wife, Elsa, whose real name was Alice Jacob, but she preferred the name Elsa. And they married in 1799. They settled on a farm in a place called Pomfret, Vermont. And actually, they weren't too far away from the Joseph Smith Sr. family, although the two never knew each other at the time. In 1815, there was an event on the other side of the earth in a place called Indonesia. It was a Mount Tabor, which was a volcano. It exploded with such explosiveness that the whole atmosphere of our planet was covered in ash and soot, and so much so that farmers couldn't grow their crops. The sun just couldn't get through. In fact, in 1816, they described that year as a year without a summer. We were still getting snow and frost even in July and August. So that motivated a lot of farm people to see if they couldn't go somewhere else to grow their crops. That's why Joseph Smith Sr. moved where he did in New York. And that's why John Johnson and his family and his 8 children came here to what was then known as the Western Reserve. When they moved here, they bought 100 acres of farmland, and they actually lived in a cabin across the street from this home. In 1828, they came here in 1818 and 1828. They decided to build their dream home, and that's what you see here. This home is very much of a New England style, and attached to this house is this structure, part of which is a summer kitchen, part of which is a carriage house, and part of it is a tack room for harnesses and things like that. So it's 193 years old. It's been in relatively good condition. It's been pretty much lived in throughout all of this period of time. And the church bought it in the year 1956 and used it as a welfare farm. I understand they grew a lot of strawberries and apples and stuff. But in 1996 or 98, I guess, they decided that there was such an interest in the house that they would renovate the house, bring it back to its condition when the Johnsons were here. And that's how we got the house today.
Can you see things? Okay. Well, we have an internet problem, and so I just turned it off, turned it on, put it on data. But okay. Anyway, what the Johnsons did in this house was very innovative at the time. And so rather than go through and show you all of the stuff that the new, I mean, you know, the stuff that everybody kind of knows about, we thought we'd highlight some of the things that they were new at that point in time. This is, most people had a summer kitchen, but it was not attached to the house. But Elsa's was, and that was kind of a new thing. It also showed how prosperous they were. Now, over here is her dry sink, but right next to it, excuse me, is a hand pump. And Elsa had running water in her kitchen. And this was a really new thing. They had built a cistern that went under the kitchen and partway outside, caught all of the rainwater that came down. And so the water was very clean and very pure. And she was able to use this in her house. The Johnsons were dairy farmers. I think I already said that, but the men and boys would milk 10 to 20 cows twice a day. There is one tax receipt for 1 year saying they had 25 cows. And that's a lot of cows to milk. And what do you do with milk? And so Elsa and the girls used that to make cheese and butter. And that's what they sold and made their money on. This is a cheese form. And we're going to show you a couple of others that are much bigger than that you can see. But the girls would have to go down every evening. They packed this with cheese. They stuck it down in their basement or cellar, which it has stones down there. And they would have to go down every day and turn all of these cheese forms over. And of course, they have a butter churn. Elsa would have had far, far more than one. All the cheese and butter, or the butter they were turning out. They had markets down into the Ohio River, and when the Erie Canal opened up into New York. I'm just going to show you some of the things. Unfortunately, the furnishings in the house, none of them are original, but they are from this location and from this time, the time period. So these would be things that Elsa would have on her shelves. Now, this is her pantry, and it's a very large pantry, even by today's standards. Everything's original, the floors, the woodwork, and they replaced parts of these 3 shelves, but everything else is original. And up here are another 2 of those cheese forms. So you get an idea of how big those things were. And they were really pretty heavy and bulky to work with. Now, go ahead. I'm not sure. Is it on this side or that side? Oh, up here. Um, I have seen these in several other places, so I'm assuming that it was pretty common at that time. Does that help? Other than that, I don't know much about it. Oh, well, now this one is original. Let me see if I can get it up close so you can see that, that's been well used. That's a good question. Keep asking. But in here is it's just a little room, but this is called a bourning room. And this was a new thing or an unusual thing. And this was a place where women could come to give birth to their babies. And it's away from the house. It's close to the fireplace and to the running water and to food. And so she and her baby could be in here and have some privacy. Now Elsa was no longer having children. She had 15 children. Five of them died and 10 of them lived to adulthood. And so they think that this was used for either sick people, hired help, or her daughters and daughter-in-laws were having children at this time. Now we're going to show you some doors, and this is called fancy painting. And this was not expected at all when they started to do the restoration. This farmhouse had been lived in. The Stevens family bought the house from the Johnsons, and 4 to 5 generations of the Stevens family lived in this house until the church bought it from them in 1956. So there were layer upon layer upon layer of paint, where I understand there was about 15, 16 layers of paint. So they had a restoration, they had someone come in and restore these, and they started working on them, and this is what they found, and this was totally unexpected. There are some color, the way the colors in a house run, this kind of painting on the walls, lots of things were unexpected when they got to them. And they have recreated them, or actually recreated is kind of the wrong word. They have restored them. They hired a special artist to come in and just copy all of those brush strokes. And so this one is Sands of Time. And then this one is called Tree of Life. And you can see this in the kitchen on every door. It was on the door frames here, on the chair rails, on the floorboards, everything. It was all over. Elsa loved that. And they found it even in other places. But now this is her fireplace. This is her winter fireplace. I had to get all the way across the room to get this in because it is one huge fireplace, probably one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. And this part of it is totally original. I think this piece of wood, they say, is original, but the top and the molding that connects everything, they had to replace. It got scorched. But if you think about it, this is 193 years old. That is really old, and it's still workable. We could light the fire and it would still work. Of course, they'd fire us, so we don't do that. But this is Elsa's oven. She could get 15 to 18 loaves of bread in there at one time. And she was doing a lot of cooking and entertaining the year that Joseph and Emma lived here. People were coming from all over, and the Johnsons were very gracious hosts. They gave them beds. Elsa prepared food. She sewed for some of them. it was really quite a thing. Now we're in a little kind of hallway off to the side, and this is a side door, which in and of itself is not unusual. But John wanted a way to go from his bedroom to the outside without having to go through the house. And so he put this door in. He built a staircase, or had a staircase built. It went all the way up, and they put a door there, but his and Elsa's bedroom was right here up on the second floor. And so he could go and come anytime he wanted. But when Joseph and Emma lived here, they gave this to Joseph as his office, which was really convenient because anybody that wanted to see Joseph would go and come this way. And it was, very, very helpful. And we kind of think that he was inspired to do that because it just fit in with what was needed. Okay, we're going into the family parlor. And if you notice the colors, every room in this house has a different color. Elsa, again, loved color. And they have left some spot in the room showing what it looked like when they finished, when they took it down to the base coat so that it's the same color. Now, we don't know what she had on her walls, so they have just left those white.
Now, this room is where John and Elsa read the Book of Mormon for the very first time. And they did that because their son Lyman had gone to Kirtland. Now, that's 30 miles away from here, to do some business. And he happened to run into 4 missionaries who were on their way to Missouri to teach the Lamanite people, or the Native Americans. And he was so taken with the message that they were giving that he decided to get baptized right there on the spot. He comes home and tells his family, I have been baptized a member of the Church of Christ. Well, that's what our church was known as in those days. They were rather concerned because they knew nothing about this new church. They decided that they would investigate a little bit, and they went to their minister by the name of Ezra Booth. Well, Ezra Booth did some looking around, and he brought back a copy of the Book of Mormon. So Ezra and his wife Dorcas, along with John and Elsa, sat down at this table in this room and read the Book of Mormon all night long. They were really quite taken with the book and decided that it was worth a trip to Kirtland to visit with Joseph. Well, they went to Kirtland and met with Joseph and asked a question. They said, can this church do miracles like we read about in the New Testament? There was a reason for that question in the fact that Elsa had not been able to use one of her arms for the last 2 years. She had been struggling with that arm. It was so painful, she couldn't raise it above her head. Well, Joseph just had received section 42 of the Doctrine and Covenants that talks about healing. So he asked them to come back the next day. And they do. He comes into the room and he gently takes her by the arm, asks her if she has faith in Jesus Christ, that her arm can be healed. She said, yes, I do. And he gives her a blessing and leaves the room. Well, Ezra Booth talks to Elsa and says, Elsa, how is your arm? And Elsa is able to raise her arm just as easily as she had ever done in her life. That was one of the first miracles that took place in the church. She was thrilled. And so they decided at that point in time that they would get baptized, members of the church, while they were there in Kirtland. On their way home, they asked Joseph and Cindy Rigdon if they would come down to Hiram and teach their family and friends, because they were really excited to share this church with their friends. Joseph and Cindy do. Then a few months later, Joseph is living on the Isaac Morley farm. Isaac Morley has been called as a member of the bishopric, where Edward Partridge has been called to be the first bishop of the church. Now, that's not a problem, but they are called to serve in Missouri. So Isaac has to sell his farm. Well, when John and Elsa learn that Joseph and Emma are without a home, they invite them to come here and live in this house with them. Also, they invite Sidney and his wife Phoebe to come and live in a log home that they used to live in. So the Rigdons lived across the street with their 6 children, and Emma and Joseph lived here. And that's how they came to live here in Hiram.
We've walked into the entrance. There's a steep staircase on one side, and this is the front door. This will play into a story in just a minute. But this is the formal parlor. And this was a room that the family did not use very often. It was used for weddings and funerals. This would have been where Elsa put her best furniture, best dishes, best everything, including her best bed. And when special people came to stay with them, they would be given this room. And you've probably noticed the floor. This was another surprise. We had a tour with the architect that restored this yesterday, and he was saying that this pattern was so surprising and kind of shocking to the people doing the restoration. They had quite a discussion whether they really wanted to redo it here. And they decided that to be true to the restoration, this is what Elsa had, and so they painted it. It's just a checkerboard pattern. But in this room, we get to talk about the tar and feathering. And the church was growing a lot here in Hiram. There were a lot of people that were joining, and when they would join, they would move to Missouri or other Kirtlands, places like that. Some of the older settlers were very upset at that. They didn't like the fact that when people joined, their friends or craftsmen in the town joined, that they would move away. It kind of upset them. But one of the things that really bothered him was some of the doctrines that Joseph was teaching. He received 17 revelations here, and one of them was section 76. He got that in February 16th, 1832. And this is 76 is where they talk about the 3 degrees of glory and the sons of perdition and the resurrections and what's going to happen to you when you die. And that caused a lot of problems. And even members of the church had a hard time with it, some of them. And there began to be such opposition that about 36 days later, on March 24th, a group of men gathered. This was a Saturday night, about midnight, gathered down the street. They blackened their face. They drank a little bit of whiskey, to get their courage up. And then they came down the street. They broke into 2 groups. One group went over to get Sidney, and the other group came here to get Joseph. Now, the group that went to get Sidney pulled him out by his legs, allowing his head to bounce down the stone stairs. And they say there was a wood pile and all kinds of stuff that they drug him through. He got several very deep cuts to his head. And he also received a severe brain injury that he suffered from the rest of his life. When they came to get Joseph, they think this is where Joseph and Emma were staying. They had a set of adopted twins that had the measles, and they had been working with them all day. And so Emma takes one twin and gets in the big bed, and Joseph takes the other twin and lays in this smaller trundle bed. About midnight, this group of men comes through that front door in here. They grab Joseph, they pick him up and carry him out, leaving the little baby that was in bed with him uncovered. Once they get Joseph and Sidney outside, they strip them, they beat them pretty severely, and then they tar and feather them. Now, the tar they used was not the black asphalt that we think of, but it was a pine tar. It was kind of a reddish brown, but it was very, very sticky. And so when they put feathers on it, it just adhered to their body. And because of that, the rest of the night, Sydney's family and Joseph's family and friends that come to help spent the night scraping that tar off of their bodies. Sydney was delirious for a couple of days. Joseph, however, was not, and he remembered that he had to teach a sermon or give a talk in church the next day. So he got up and put his clothes on, and he stood out on the step out here and gave that sermon. So let's go look at that step. Now this is the stone step. They think this is original. There are two other stones underneath it that it sets on. And they think this was here when Joseph was here, but he definitely stood on the steps here. And then he spoke to about 250 people out here that had come to hear him speak. There were members of the mob. They wanted to see if he really would show up. And there were other people here. And 3 of those other people decided to be baptized that afternoon. We know that the home that Sidney Rigdon was in was directly across the street. The church does not own that property. They cannot find the foundations for that house, but the diaries say it was across the street. And they feel that the tar and feathering took place down there, less than a quarter of a mile away. People could hear what was going on, and a lot of people went to help, but the mobs had ran them off and actually threatened their lives. People that did the mobbing expected Joseph and Sidney to go away, and the church would go away, and everything would go back the way it was. Well, it didn't. In fact, the church just got stronger and stronger and stronger. The one sad thing that did happen is that the little baby that was in bed with Joseph died 5 days later. He was buried here on the Johnson property someplace. Nobody knows where. And that was Joseph and Emma's 4th baby that they had lost. But they still had Julia, the other little twin, and she grew to adulthood.
Well, let me take you into this room right now. As you can tell, we're on the upper floor of the house. This room was John and Elsie's bedroom. Look how big and spacious this room was. Even had a fireplace. I don't know if you're familiar with that cabinet above the fireplace, but that's called a warming cabinet. That was very handy when it came to wintertime, because that cabinet rests right next to the chimney, and the chimney would warm up your blankets and your bed clothing, and so you'd have a nice warm sleep. But this room gave enough space for Joseph to have chair and table, and he often had people in here. Instead of calling them meetings, he called them conferences. And so we'll come back and talk to this a little bit more, but this is kind of what the Johnsons gave up. When we go across the hall here, this is the side of the house where the children would have slept. And John and Elsa made a bedroom out of this side of the house. That wall that you see right there was put in place just before Joseph and Emma came here so that they could have a little privacy. Now, by the time Emma and Joseph got here, most of their children had left home due to marriage or school or work or something like that. But you can see that they installed a couple of double beds. It wasn't unusual to have 2 or 3 people in that bed at the same time. Now, this is called a sleeping loft. Now, just to kind of orient you as to where you are, this wall right here is a chimney. That's the chimney to the summer kitchen we were in just a couple of minutes ago. And then you have a wall here and a wall here that would not have been here at the time. And then, I don't know if you notice the windows above the carriage house and so forth. So you're in the attic above the summer kitchen and the carriage house. Now, why do they need so much space for people to sleep? It's because a lot of times church leaders came to confer with Joseph on various matters. Some of them were farm hands that came and helped at different times of the year, like harvest times and so forth. And a lot of them were missionaries. And a lot of missionaries came to get some instruction from Joseph, as well as copy some of his revelations so that they could take them with them. Now, you got to understand that because we're in the middle of rural Ohio, there's no convenient hotels or motels that we consider normal today. So if you had traveled most of the day to get here and talk to Joseph, and then you had to go home at night, sometimes that could be pretty hazardous. So the Johnsons were very good about asking people if they would like to stay overnight. And this is often where they would stay.
This is a good place to show you a little bit of the restoration that they did to the house. The house is 80% original, but they had to shore up the boards and the things that were here. Now, the light wood is the new, and the dark wood is the original wood that they found here. And on this side, there's very little light wood. It's almost all dark. But they were very careful about what they did. A lot of this had been covered over with other, the ceilings and things like that. And so that's why it's in such good condition. The floors on the second floor are all original. They are wavy up and down. Most of these doors are original too. Now in here, there's a couple. This is a closet, and these are built-in closets, and this is absolutely new. This was brand new ideas, and it wasn't even for clothing. This is again the original wood that's in there that it's been preserved because it wasn't used very much. But in this room is called the workroom. And this is where Elsa would have had a spinning wheel, and she would have had a loom. She made her own thread. She then would weave her own fabrics and do a lot of sewing for people. Now we have another door that I want to show you. And this is the top of that staircase. The people would come in the side door and then come up here and then just walk right into Joseph's office. Now this room is called the Revelation Room, and it has a very sacred feel to it. Marvelous things happened here, and we're going to tell you about them. But if you were to come here, this would very much have kind of a temple feeling to it. Joseph would receive revelations. They'd be handwritten. He received 20 that we know of. Only 17 are published. And as he would receive them, they would put the paper that they had copied them down on in a box, something like that. And anybody that wanted to read them could read them. He wanted people to read the revelations. He wanted them to have access. Part of the reason why so many people were here was the missionaries, before they went on their mission, would come down here And they'd stay 2 or 3 weeks. And what they were doing is copying these revelations. And they've, of course, put paper here so that you can make your own copy. But the problem began to be that a missionary would make a copy, and then he would take it with him into the mission field, and somebody there would want to make a copy, which was okay. And then somebody else would copy that copy. And if there was, there were little mistakes entering in, and Joseph was quite concerned. And so at a conference that they held here, it was decided that they would print these revelations. So they made master copies, sent them off to be printed in Missouri, and that's where the printing press was destroyed. Some of the prints were saved, and they were able to publish these into what they called the Book of Commandments. Now, this is copy of the original. It's very small, and it fits right into your pocket, and that was the purpose. Well, a couple of years later, and several revelations later, the saints published the Doctrine and Covenants, and this was done in Kirtland. And it's a little bit bigger and thicker because it has the lectures on faith in it. And they were taken out in 1880, and because they were not canonized. And so what we have today is just revelations.
Now, the big project that Joseph and Sidney had worked on and continue to work on was the translation of the Bible. Now, today we call it the Joseph Smith translation or the inspired version of the Bible. It's all the same. But we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it's translated correctly. And Joseph would read passages from the scriptures, and Sidney would follow along with him. And when Joseph was prompted by the Spirit, he would say, now this has got to change. And Sidney would write down the corrected version and make a mark in his Bible to say exactly where that change had to be. Well, they came along to the book of John, chapter 5, verse 29, which says, and shall come forth they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. Well, that fit very well with the teachings of the Protestant people of the day. They felt that when you leave this life, you will either go to a heaven or to a hell. Joseph said that that wasn't correct. And so we changed it to read this. And shall come forth they that have done good unto the resurrection of the just, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of the unjust. Well, that led to some conversation between the two men about what resurrection is all about. And they began to have a series of 6 visions, which we call Doctrine and Covenants, section 76. So Joseph would see a vision. He would say, what do I see? And he would describe what he's seeing. And Sidney would say, I see the same. Then Sidney would have a vision. He'd say, what do I see? He would describe it. And Joseph would say, I see the same. And this interchange went back and forth between the two men for quite a period of time. Well, a fellow by the name of Philo Dibble came into this room, a little on the late side, but he described what he saw. He said there were 12 people sitting on these benches, all totally engrossed in what was going on between Joseph and Sidney. Nobody said a word. In fact, they said that while Joseph and Sidney had been wearing dark clothes, during the vision, it looked like their clothing was the most white clothing they'd ever seen. In fact, even their faces looked transparent. Well, again, this is where we get the 3 degrees of glory. And it was so radical and different from the teachings of the time that Many people couldn't understand it. In fact, Brigham Young had to put it aside for a little while to think about it because he'd always been brought up with the former notion of what's going on after you die. But when Wilford Woodruff read it, he said that was the most beautiful thing he'd ever read. And so we'd like to share with you one of the visions that Joseph and Sidney saw, and it's in the form of a testimony. We could share that with you for just a minute. It's in the section 76, verses 22 to 24. It says, "And now, after the many testimonies which have been given of him, this is the testimony last of all, which we give of him, that he lives. For we saw him, even on the right hand of God, and we heard the voice bearing record that he is the only begotten of the Father, that by him and through him and of him the worlds are and were created, and the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God." Notice in that second verse, I kind of emphasized the fact that they saw the Lord. In fact, they saw the Father and the Son. Now, this was the second time that the Father and the Son had been seen in the Kirtland area. The first time was in the Isaac Morley farm when Joseph was ordaining the first high priests in the church. The second time was here in this room. The third time was in the School of the Prophets, which was above the Newell K. Whitney store in Kirtland. And the fourth time was in the upper room of the Kirtland Temple. Joseph had some brethren in there. He was teaching them things they needed to know for the dedication of the temple, and the Father and the Son appeared there. In fact, you can read Joseph's vision, what Joseph saw, in the 137th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, where he sees his brother Alvin in the celestial kingdom, and is quite concerned because Alvin was never baptized. And the Lord tells Joseph that those who would have accepted the gospel while here upon the earth could be candidates for the celestial kingdom. And of course, that led on to what we know as vicarious work for the dead.
Well, do you have any questions? I'm sorry, we didn't hear that. Oh, yes. Yeah, I wish you could come and feel it, but that's good. And we're finding that with, that was one of the concerns about doing virtual tours, was that people wouldn't be able to feel the Spirit. And we're finding that the Lord has taken care of that, that people can feel that. Well, we'd like to end with one statement by President Hinckley. So he gave this when this house was dedicated. He was the one that did the dedication. And he says, "It was here that the prophet Joseph Smith lived for about a year. It was here that he suffered such terrible indignities. It was here that God spoke through the prophet Joseph Smith in language clear and unmistakable, setting forth some of the great purposes of this work and some of the great doctrinal concepts which we have to present to the world. The power of God that was expressed in this farmhouse has gone over the earth, and we have scarcely seen the beginning of it." That last little part gets me every time I read it. That these doctrines that we received here, which are 100 and some odd years old now, have scarcely begun to spread over the earth. Well, do you have any other questions or concerns? Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Well, you have a good day, okay? Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.